The dining room smelled of roasted turkey and sweet rolls, the kind of meal that used to bring us together. Once, when Daniel was little, he'd scramble into his chair at the table, waving his fork and asking if I made his favorite potatoes. Now, at 50, he lounged at the head like a king, surrounded by his wife and children, his voice heavy with arrogance instead of gratitude. When I entered that evening, I noticed it right away. 12 chairs lined the table, polished wood gleaming, but the 13th, mine, was gone. I paused in the doorway, my cane pressing into the hardwood. "Where's my seat?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Daniel looked up from carving the turkey, his lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, don't worry, Mom. You don't need a chair. You can sit on the floor. You're practically invisible anyway. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video." His wife, Evelyn, laughed, her bracelets jangling as she poured wine into glasses. "Honestly, it fits. You're always hunched over in that corner anyway." The children snickered. Amy whispered, "Grandma sits with the dogs." Jacob slapped his knee, chanting, "Grandma on the floor! Grandma on the floor!" My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I had grown used to their barbs, each one sharper than the last. But something about that missing chair, the deliberate emptiness at the table, cut deeper than words ever could. A chair meant place, meant belonging, meant respect. They had erased mine. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Daniel had invited his business friends, important men with tailored suits and polished shoes. They looked from me to him, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. He thrived in that power, using me as the evening's entertainment. I stood at the edge of the table, my hands trembling only slightly as I tightened them around my cane. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl every memory of sleepless nights, scraped knees I'd kissed better, and paychecks I'd stretched thin just to keep him clothed. But I didn't. Instead, I lowered myself carefully onto the hardwood floor, my knees aching as the room gasped. The chandelier light pooled over me, casting my shadow against their polished shoes. I sat cross-legged, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "See?" Daniel said, raising his glass in mock celebration. "She fits better there, like part of the ground we walk on." The laughter erupted again, Evelyn nearly choking on her wine. Amy and Jacob clapped their hands, chanting louder, "Grandma on the floor! Grandma on the floor!" But the guests didn't laugh this time. One man coughed awkwardly into his napkin, another shifted, eyes flicking toward me with pity. Their discomfort was a crack in Daniel's perfect evening, though he didn't see it yet. I kept my head bowed, the picture of obedience, but behind my lowered eyes a storm brewed. They thought I was beaten, humiliated, powerless. What they didn't know was that silence is sharper than a knife when held long enough. As I sat there, every scrape of fork against porcelain, every bite of meat, every sip of wine echoed above me, and with each sound I waited. I let the humiliation soak into them, into the guests who would take this memory home, into the children who would see the cracks in their father's mask, into Evelyn, who thought cruelty was class. I waited, not for forgiveness, not for escape. I waited for the moment when their laughter would taste bitter, when the floor they made me sit on would rise beneath them and drag them down. And as Daniel laughed louder, mocking me for being beneath them all, I smiled faintly to myself where no one could see. Because humiliation, once planted, grows roots, and I knew they would choke on it soon enough. I sat quietly on the floor, my knees throbbing against the cold hardwood, while the laughter continued to buzz above me. The chandelier swayed faintly from the vibrations of their mirth, its golden light dripping across their smug faces. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied grin plastered across his lips, basking in the approval he thought he had earned. Evelyn clinked her glass against his, whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "Finally, she's where she belongs. Do you know how much more relaxed this house feels when she isn't pretending to matter?" The children, emboldened by their parents, bent down toward me, dangling scraps of bread as though I were some obedient dog. "Beg, Grandma," Amy sang. "Beg for a piece." Jacob barked like a puppy, sending Evelyn into another fit of laughter. But I didn't reach for the bread. I didn't answer. I let them exhaust themselves with cruelty, because silence often unsettles bullies more than words. Slowly, I began to notice the change around the table. The guests weren't laughing anymore. One woman whispered to her husband, her eyes darting between me and Daniel with something that looked like disgust. Another man fiddled with his cufflinks, avoiding Daniel's gaze. The merriment was turning sour, the room heavy with unease. But Daniel, blinded by arrogance, didn't notice. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "Come on, everyone! Raise your glasses to the woman who gave me life, just so she could end up on the floor at my feet." Some lifted their glasses reluctantly. Others lowered their eyes. I kept still, my face serene, but inside me the storm churned hotter. When Evelyn noticed the shift in the guests, she tried to cover it with charm. "She doesn't mind," she said, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "She's old. She's used to being beneath people." A few of the guests winced. Daniel scowled at them. "What? You think I'm being too harsh? She's useless. She's lived long enough off my generosity. The least she can do is play the part of a servant at my table." That was the moment, the exact one, when pity began to turn into judgment. The guests glanced at each other, silently agreeing that the powerful man at the head of the table wasn't powerful at all. He was cruel, and cruelty doesn't impress. It corrodes. Amy whispered again, this time not to mock, but with a small, quivering voice. "Daddy, why is Grandma on the floor for real? Why didn't you just give her a chair?" The question pierced the air sharper than a knife. Daniel's face twitched, his composure faltering for the briefest second. He forced a laugh. "Because she doesn't deserve one, honey. Chairs are for people who contribute. She hasn't contributed in years." I closed my eyes, the words sinking like stones into my chest. Hasn't contributed. My hands that once mended his clothes, cooked his meals, paid bills when his father died, were suddenly worthless to him. Evelyn noticed the guests whispering. She leaned into Daniel, her voice tight. "They're judging us. Stop talking." But he waved her off, too drunk on his own cruelty to recognize the walls closing in. "Let them judge," he barked. "This is my house, my rules. If they don't like it, they can leave." And still, I waited. The night dragged on, food growing cold on plates, wine glasses refilled too many times. I stayed on the floor motionless, each minute turning the air thicker with the discomfort. Guests excused themselves early, their smiles brittle, their coats clutched tightly around them. By the time the last one left, Daniel's victory had soured. His voice was hoarse from shouting, his laughter forced. Evelyn's face was stiff with embarrassment. The children had grown restless, their earlier glee replaced by confusion. I slowly placed my palms against the floor and pushed myself up with my cane. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, commanding in its quietness. Their eyes followed me, unease flickering like shadows across their faces. Daniel sneered. "What now? Going to sulk in your room, old woman?" I met his gaze, steady and cold. "No, Daniel. I've sat on the floor long enough. Tomorrow we will see who's left standing." His smirk faltered. Evelyn's hand tightened around his arm, and in that silence, heavy with dread, the balance shifted. Because humiliation doesn't vanish with laughter, it festers, and I had planted it deep in his house tonight. The next day the house was quiet, but tension clung to the walls like smoke. Evelyn paced the kitchen, muttering about the guests and how Daniel had made them look like fools. Daniel brushed her off, trying to act unbothered, but I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes every time he scrolled his phone. Word travels fast in their circles, and his cruel display from the night before had already begun leaking through whispers. I moved silently, letting them believe I had retreated to my place of shame. But while Daniel and Evelyn worried about appearances, I made my own preparations. I had no chair at their table, but I still had the power to turn the table itself. That evening, Evelyn prepared dinner again, smaller, Just the family this time, but the air was sharp, heavy with unsaid things. The children sat quietly, their laughter gone, their eyes darting nervously between their father and me. Daniel broke the silence with a forced chuckle. "Let's just forget about last night. It was a joke, all right. Mom doesn't care." I leaned on my cane, slowly taking my place, not on the floor, but standing beside the head of the table where Daniel sat. My presence made him shift uncomfortably. "You say I don't care," I said softly. "But the truth is, you don't know what it means to care. You only know how to take." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. Another lecture. Daniel, tell her to sit down before she ruins the meal." But I didn't move. Instead, I pulled something from my cardigan pocket, a folded piece of paper yellowed at the edges. Daniel frowned, confused, until I laid it on the table in front of him. It wasn't a will. It wasn't money. It was a receipt. "Do you remember this?" I asked, my voice steady. "No, of course you don't. You were 5. You had pneumonia. The hospital demanded money up front and I didn't have enough. I begged. I worked nights. I sold my wedding ring to cover this bill. This piece of paper is proof that while your father was gone, I saved your life." The children leaned forward wide-eyed. Evelyn scoffed. "So what? Ancient history. He owes you nothing for that." I turned my gaze on her, sharp as glass. "He owes me respect, and last night he threw it on the floor." Daniel shifted, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the paper in his hands. His face flushed red, then pale. The children's eyes stayed on him, no longer laughing, no longer chanting. "You told them their grandmother was useless," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "You told them to forget me, but they will not forget this. They will remember who kept them alive before they were even thought of. They will remember who you are when you strip away the wine and the chairs and the titles. A man who mocked his own mother like dirt." Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The children shrank from him, Amy whispering, "Daddy, why did you say that to Grandma?" That single question shattered him more than any speech I could give. His mask slipped. He stammered, I didn't mean it. It was a joke." I leaned closer, my voice low but cutting. "Then eat your joke." From my other pocket, I placed a small bowl on the table. Inside it was the dirt I had scooped from the garden the night before, damp and raw. Daniel recoiled, his face twisting. Evelyn hissed, "This is insane! Don't you dare!" But the children's eyes were fixed on him, waiting. The same children who had laughed at me on the floor now sat in silence, expecting their father to answer for his cruelty. I slid the bowl closer. "You made me sit in the dirt of this house. Now taste what you made of me." Daniel's hand trembled. His pride battled his shame, but the children's stares broke him. He reached into the bowl with shaking fingers, lifted a pinch of soil, and pressed it to his tongue. His face contorted as he gagged, eyes watering. Amy gasped. Jacob looked away. Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. "This is madness. Stop humiliating him." I straightened, my cane firm in my grip. Humiliation is a mirror. I only showed him his own reflection. Daniel gagged again, coughing, his chest heaving as tears sprang to his eyes, not from the dirt, but from the weight of what he had done. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely, "please, no more. I'm sorry. Please." The man who once smirked at my pain now begged me for mercy. I turned to the children, ignoring him. "Never call your grandmother useless again. Never forget that respect is the only thing that keeps families from rotting in their own dirt." Then I left the table, my head high, cane tapping steadily against the floor. For once, it wasn't me who felt small. It was Daniel, hunched and broken, choking on the bitterness of his own cruelty. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.